Hello, everybody. Welcome back to another Night Shadow tips and tricks, baby. Let's go. Okay, we're not gonna get into that. This is part 6 of the art of flow. I hope you guys have been improving, have been learning something from this series. This is what I'm doing, why I'm doing it. I like to help people out with their flow, even if I'm not an expert myself, right? But I've definitely learned a lot of things being around Glovers, talking to Glovers, seeing a lot of videos from Glovers. So I'd like to help you out with your flow, and I like to see people flow. So anyway, today we're going to be going over tutting, and we're going to be going over flails as well. There's no real connection between the two of those, but I just wanted to make those two in this video. Because tutting is not that complicated to explain. It's really hard to get good at tutting, but it's basic. It's basically a very easy concept to explain to you. And I'm definitely going to go over like a little combo I learned. There's a lot of combos you can learn absolutely online, but I want you guys to know like how the concept works and how you can make your own moves, how you can like freestyle with this. I'm definitely not as talented where I can just freestyle with tutting, because tutting is its own little movement, its own little dance, its own little style, I guess. You can do basically a whole routine just doing tutting movements. But you're basically working with a lot of squares. You're basically working with a lot more rigid movements again, because we've gone over the grid and how you move around the grid. And with this, it's kind of more rigid, I would say. Not really rigid, but it's harder to travel around, because you can't just travel around the points as you usually would with, like, let's say finger rolls or whips or flails, where you can move around the place and it's not really that bad. But with tutting, you really have certain rules that you have to follow. That's why I kind of wanted to cover it a little bit later on. But yeah, with tutting, you're basically doing like 90-degree angles, and you're working with a lot of squares, right? Like you could be doing a square over here, a square over there. You can bring it forward. You can bring it even down there, right? It might not look as good right now because I'm sitting down, but you basically get the point, right? That you're using 90-degree movements and making boxes. Making boxes with your hands and your arms, basically. You can even take it where you can do it with your legs, but we're not going to be covering that because I don't know how to do that. But basically, you have the same concepts when you're moving. Like in finger tutting, you can do some, tracing. You can do some hinging. You can do some rotation, right? There's a lot of things you can do to your movements, and there's sometimes where you want to be moving both hands, right? And there's sometimes where you're just going to be trying to move like one hand at a time, right? Just depending on what you're going with. There's certain times where you want to be using both hands, and sometimes you want to be using just one hand to move around it. So basically, I got this combo that I learned. You basically start with your hands straight, and you basically just shoot your hand out. You kind of fold this way. You kind of bring this over here, make this tutting movement, trace it down there. Then you're going to trace down, and then you're going to move this whole position, this whole structure over here, right? You're not really moving your hands or arm, you're just shifting them to over here. Then you're going to trace with this one, make it connect. Gonna trace this one down, bring this one over here. Then you're gonna bring this one right over there. Then you're gonna cover this one right here, bring this one out, bring this one all the way to the front, rotate it, bring it back, lay it down here. Then you're going to shoot it out again, rotate it, bring it back, go again with a king tut position. Then you're going to bring it all the way over your head. You're going to connect to your elbow. You're going to make a box. Then you're going to shift the box like this, right? You're just shifting the placement of your hands. This one's going to go up. This one's going to go down. Again, you can do this infinitely if you really want. But you're right here. Then you're going to trace all the way around here. Then you're going to lay both hands down. Go back to your beginning position, really. Shoot them out, and that's when you're done. Again, you can replay this video. You can watch it again. You can find other routines. You don't really have to learn that one, but I wanted to do like an example of how tutting movements look. So that's just the routine like I learned out of memory, but you can definitely get certain concepts that you use. You know, sometimes you're using both of your hands to move, you know, like in the box section. Sometimes you're just moving one hand, right, and leaving the other one still. Now, the thing you really want to take into account with this is that your angles are straight, your arms are straight as well, because you want to give that illusion of a perfectly shaped box, right? So you want to practice having your hands straight this way. I can't really have them all the way straight when I do this. So a good exercise that you can do is definitely stretch your wrist as often as possible, just so you can get those movements and that hand as straight as you can. That way you can make your illusions look very clean, basically, because you're working with a lot of straight angles, right? You're working with a lot of boxy movements. Like I said, you can do, I mentioned this in my other video, that you can do like some crumbling motions, or you can be over here and add some liquid and move it down there. Again, there's no real rules to what you can do, and I've seen that especially in gloving, where somebody's like in a tutting structure and then they do some like liquid over there and make another tutting thing. But that would come with a lot of practice, right? You can't just start doing tutting movements and then, you know, do like some finger rolls over here. It's just not gonna make it look right. But yeah, you're basically just working with 90-degree angles, and that box comes into play a lot, that we talked about in the last video, where your palms want to be facing one side of that cube, right? And you know, you're not basically just working with a 2D grid right there, right? That you can just be doing movements right here. You can definitely be moving towards somebody, bring it back, go like that. You know what I mean? Like working with that perception as well, because you're using the 3D grid, right? The Z-axis. So when you start incorporating all of those styles, you can definitely start experimenting yourself with what you can do with your arms and where you can trace them. You know, you don't have to be doing like wrist movements all the time. You know, you can just be moving your arms, right? And this is still tutting, but you're not really doing anything with your wrist, and you're still working with that grid mentality, right? That you're working with certain points that you're isolating, or you're working around, right? Because you can be doing like a tutting structure here, moving both hands, but you're still keeping that center in the same place, right? You can be doing all sorts of moves with tutting, but you got to get that in your mind, that you're working in a certain way to move around the grid when you're working with just tutting movements. And you want to work on those stretches, getting your hands, you know, used to those movements, because at first when you start doing these movements, right, they're going to kind of like strain your hand a little bit. So that's why you kind of want to stretch as much as you can, and stretch your fingers as well, because that helps with finger tutting. But this one helps with tutting as well, right? Some people use like a wall. They press against the wall and do that for like 5 minutes, just so their hand can, you know, get used to that 90-degree movement. And as more that you do it, the less strain you're going to be putting on your hands, right? Because you're already used to those movements going in that fashion, right? So yeah, stretch a lot, this one is definitely going to take you a little bit more time, at least it did for me, to kind of learn how to move around and keeping my arms straight, keeping my wrist going in a certain movement, right? Because you got to watch out that, you know, when you're doing like a certain thing, that your hand is not just like popping out this way, because then the illusion's kind of broken. So you want to keep that grid mentality, like I said, right? You want to isolate certain points and go around it and make sure that you're working with the X, Y, and Z axis in that fashion. This is why it's a little bit more tricky than doing your regular gloving movements, right? Because you kind of gotta be aware of where it is in the X, Y, and Z axis, and that your moves are looking good and straight. You know what I mean? Using that grid mentality, using that box. That's where you kind of gotta practice in front of a mirror and see yourself and see how your angles are looking, and that your angles are pointing the right way, right? Because you don't want, you don't want duck hands as well. Like when people do this with tutting, you want your hands to imitate like a straight angle, no matter where you're going, right? So again, it might look a little bit sloppy because right now I'm sitting down. I usually do it standing up, but you get the idea, right? That you're messing with boxy movements, right? Like I said, I need some work, since, see right there, like my elbow was a little bit bent. You want to keep things as straight as possible, right? That's when you're working with tutting. That's why I find it a little harder to work with. There's definitely a lot of videos that can teach you more combos. If you want to just learn combos, I would definitely recommend at least learning a few just to get you started, because this is not like your regular just finger rolls and liquid, right? Where you can just learn the concept and you can start kind of like practicing it and, you know, doing like your own little thing. With this one, you kind of need a little bit of examples. You kind of need like a home base. You kind of need a little bit of help getting started with that whole thing. And I'll definitely recommend learning some tutting. I don't see it that much in gloving shows, and I definitely get excited when I see some tutting, because there's some people that do some crazy stuff with tutting. And it definitely brings a lot of variety to your show. It brings out that you know like certain moves that not everybody makes. And there's definitely a lot of tutters out there. So there's definitely a lot of examples of people just doing tutting routines. A good example, I would say, is definitely Ditto. Ditto's definitely one of my favorite tutting artists, at least. Because she does a lot of things with her hands. She does it very fast, and her angles are really good. And the way she manipulates the grid is a really good example as well. And you can see in some of her moves that she moves, both her hands sometimes, and sometimes she just uses one hand and then moves the other, right? But you're moving in that same fashion of tracing, hinging, rotation. So just kind of figuring out that. But the main challenge is keeping your angle straight, keeping your arms straight, seeing how they look, and making sure that it all lines up with the X, Y, and Z axis. So I think that's as far as I'm going to go with tutting. Pretty easy concept to explain. It's not that hard. The hard part is actually making it look good and making your own combos and executing them right. So that comes with practice. I'm still practicing myself with tutting. It doesn't really come easy to me to just freestyle like in a random gloving show, to just pull out some random tutting moves. I actually have to just really think about tutting per se, like if I'm doing just some whips, some different types of whips or tunnels, you know what I mean, or finger rolls. Like I can actually just do that on the top of my head, but with tutting it's like a whole different ballgame. But that's where we'll leave it with tutting. Plenty of resources to learn about tutting as well, but I wanted to cover it and at least give you some examples on this and definitely learn it, because it will definitely bring your gloving game up, your finger tutting game and your tutting game to a different level, and bring some great stuff to your shows. And I also kind of wanted to cover flails, because flails are kind of basic as well. But the thing is, like, there's a lot of stuff you can do with flails, you know what I mean? Like, flails are just a circle that you're making with your hands, right? You're just doing this motion with your wrist, or you can do it with your elbow, which makes the circle a little bit bigger. And you can definitely incorporate both hands into this, playing with that dimension, just making circles, making little circles. There's other ways. That's where my sacred geometry link kind of comes in, because you make patterns with your flails, right? You can be doing like a triangle, like I said, like picking points. Sorry, kind of messed up on that one. Making 3 points up in the grid, and you're just kind of following that with your elbow and your wrist, right? You're thinking in geometrical patterns. However, these are not your regular, squares or triangles, because you're basically moving in circle motions, right? So there's definitely a lot of patterns you can look up. There's a lot of poi patterns that correspond a lot to the flails that you're going to be making in your shows, and it's definitely a good thing to learn, because you want to kind of study those patterns so you can do those patterns with your flails. You're not just doing the regular old flail, right? Just around. Like, you can make certain flowers and patterns, and it looks pretty cool when you're doing it with gloves, right? You can do like a square. You can do just like a plain old big old circle. You can be moving it back, moving it forth. There's a lot of stuff you can do with the flail movements, right? You can even do it with both hands spinning at the same time, but this one's kind of like reverse, right? Or you can do it in tandem motions, right? Like both going at the same time, or one going a different way, one going the other way. You can like bring one back, bring one forth. I also have seen like a cool movement that Blitzen does. I'm sure like a lot of people have seen this move where you're just doing flails over here, and then she throws out like a whip, bring it back, and it looks really cool with the lights. And that's basically pretty simple, right? You're just doing flails right here. One hand is facing the viewer, the other hand is kind of like facing the other hand. And basically when this hand comes down, so you're basically doing the flails, right? This hand comes down, you kind of like shoot it out, and this one just keeps going, right? And then you kind of bring it back to that flail motion. It actually looks pretty intricate, but it's actually not that intricate. It's just you're doing flails, then you have a little whip right there, you just throw it out, right? You don't even have to do like a whip, you can just do that same flail motion, but you're kind of taking into account that pattern that you're following, right? You're doing it with timing, so you can get back in the groove. You can do like 4 spins and then throw it out, or you can throw it out each spin, right? Depending, or you can slow it down when you're going towards the viewer. You can do a lot of things. You can bring it this way, do it with that hand. I'm not really that expert with this hand, but it looks kind of like the same. You're just doing it like that. So once you get those different patterns and how you do them, you can definitely do a lot of things with flails that look, pretty professional or pretty complex, but you're just doing circles with your hands, right? And that's where studying these patterns comes very handy, right? You can even do like a half flail, then bring it back, bring it up here using that grid mentality and that geometry, right? Because you want to make your whole show geometrical sometimes, especially when you're working with flails, right? You want to make that geometry pattern. And once you learn how to control each hand individually, you can be like throwing like a flail with this arm, and then you can be doing like some other movement with this hand, right? Like I do a lot of this sometimes. Like I do just like a finger roll with a flail, and it brings like a cool effect. You're just combining both of them together, right? That's where studying flails kind of comes in handy. and where your hand dexterity, when you can do two things with your hands, right? It gets a little complicated to practice and do in a show, but when you kind of master that, you can definitely be doing like different things with just flails. And you can be bringing one back, bringing this one forth, switching it up, crossing them. I've seen some people cross them. There's definitely like a butterfly move that you can do when one hand is going this way and the other one's going the other way. Probably doesn't look very good right there, but you can do like a butterfly effect with that. Probably looks better with the lights right now, just looking like a door, just, you know, throwing circles. But it doesn't matter. As long as you improve in that game, you can definitely study that, and it will definitely bring up a lot more spontaneity to your show, a lot more diversity, right? So you want to study some of those patterns. I might put some patterns in this video, just some regular patterns that you can study, or I might put it like in the description below of where you can find these patterns and what patterns you want to be studying at. And what you want to do is making sure you're practicing with both hands, right? Not just doing a flail with one hand. You want to practice bringing the other hand in and seeing where you can go with those circle motions, right? Because you're making circles. You can make like a little circle, you can make a big circle, you can be making one circle, one big circle here, one little circle over there. It's all about the perception, right? You're working with that geometry, that symmetry, and that grid mentality with the flails. And what you can do is study the different patterns you can make with the flails. That way you're not just doing the same old flail over and over again. You're actually bringing different types of flails and different patterns that you can be making with those flails, right? I definitely got to get better at that myself. I'm not a big flail expert, but you can definitely get a lot of more explosion with your flail game if you study and practice on the different ways you can go, right? You can be combining other elements, finger rolls, liquid, while you're doing a flail. You know, it adds a little bit of sauce to your show, a little bit of sauciness, because you can master a movement with this hand and you can be doing separate movements with the other hand. Yet you're keeping that same point, right? That same point towards the attention of the viewer, and you're doing something else with the other hand, right? You're working in another grid point with the other hand. So that's what I'm saying. You got to study that grid theory, and you got to study that symmetry to know where you can go and where you can mix up your moves in all the axes, right? That comes with practice again. You just got to practice a lot. Watch what these glovers do with flails, and practice different patterns with different hands. Some people can do like the flower pattern, the 4 petal flower, with both hands, right? Doing it in different starting at different points. I'm definitely not good at it, but you can definitely study that and study what pattern you should be making with each hand. And that just makes your whole show look so much different, so much cleaner and explosive. So I would definitely look at those patterns that you can make with flails, because there's a lot of stuff you can do with flails. And I don't see a lot of people talking a lot about that. But yeah, like that move that Blitzen does, it just brings up another game changer to your shows, right? Because you're adding that element of depth and you're adding that switch in between, which makes it look so, I don't know, so great in your shows. So you can be adding flails, and then, like I said, we talked about tutting in this video. Make sure you know the difference of what you're working with each concept, right? Because flails is a different whole ball game than tutting or finger tutting. But knowing those different concepts, you can definitely be implementing them throughout your show. Doesn't need to be like a specific routine or specific time that you spend on each concept, but once you learn how each concept works, and then you can be adding different concepts to your shows. That's where your own creativity and originality come in. You know, how are you able to manipulate both of these concepts at the same time? But you know how they work now. You know what to do in each concept. You know how to transition through each concept that you're working with, right? If you're working with flails, you know you don't really have to follow a certain pattern, but you're following that geometry and you're following that symmetry. And with tutting, you know you're working with boxes and 90-degree angles, and that you can move in a certain way with these boxes, and what you're supposed to be looking out for when you're trying to improve these moves or freestyle with these moves, or trying to make your show cleaner overall. Yeah, that's as far as I'm gonna go with tutting and flails. Probably next episode I'm going to be going over some finger dexterity, what different things you can do with finger dexterity. That's where like digits come into play, you know, pass-throughs, dials as well. Dials are definitely a good way of, you know, getting that finger dexterity up, even though a dial is a pretty simple move. But you kind of want to practice each finger right. How does each finger move, what you want to be focusing on, and definitely what exercises you can do to help your finger dexterity better, so you can get better at performing these moves, get better at practicing different moves. And like I said, it all comes together, right? It's all the art of flow. So anyways, guys, I hope you learned something new. I hope you're improving your gloving game. I hope this opened up a little bit of that flow dexterity in you. And I'll definitely see you guys in the next video. Anyways, guys, this has been the Night Shadow. Happy flowing. Peace.